Do you know what a Karaya worm is? The doctor doesn't look at me as he asks the question. He scratches at the beard under his chin and turns the MRI printout over in his hands. He won't make eye contact with me, and I shiver in my flimsy hospital gown. I hear the tone in his voice and I wonder if this is how I know I'm already dead. I just haven't been diagnosed yet. The Karaya worm is native to Malaysia, he tells me. Have you been outside the country recently? He asks, and I lie. There's a parasite, he tells me, and it gets into an ant's body. It crawls into the ant's brain and takes over. The ant walks to the tip of a tall piece of grass and waits, night after night, until eventually a grazing cow comes along and eats it. Also, the parasite can reach the cow's digestive system and lay its eggs. The ant doesn't know that it's being controlled. It simply feels compelled to go where it's told. It doesn't even try to escape from its death. He tells me this as disaffectedly as though it were nothing more than an interesting episode of Animal Planet. Fun fact at the doctor's office. He clears his throat and looks down at the MRI. The Karaya worm, he goes on, can only survive inside human hosts. It's perfectly adapted to us, but its eggs can live almost anywhere. They can be found in uncooked meat, salad greens. They can live in fresh and salt water, even in poisonous brine pools. They can be transmitted through sex. The doctor lists these things off one by one, as though trying to work a confession out of me. And only once the eggs are in a human, he continues, do they hatch. Once the worm is inside the body, it carefully lays its eggs on the brain stem. Then it works its way into the brain. It settles between the membranes. It takes over. Everything that you do, everything you think, are just products of chemicals and electrical impulses. The worm is intuitive to these things. It quickly learns how to operate your body, which nerves to pull what strings. It learns to make you do what it wants. But the worm doesn't want your body. It wants you. All of your memories, all of your mannerisms are just neurochemical triggers in your brain. The worm learns these too. It responds to your memories. It thinks your thoughts. It unconsciously does all the things that you unconsciously do. And after a while, the worm believes that it is you. It has complete control of who you are. Every night when you close your eyes, the worm reaches the end of its life cycle and dies. And every night, another one of its eggs hatches, and a new worm crawls out and takes its place. Every night when you fall asleep, you die. And every morning a new creature wakes up in your body. Even you won't know the difference. I can feel something horrible crawling in the pit of my stomach. A sickening feeling. I don't want to hear what he's saying. The doctor holds up the piece of the MRI and asks if I can see anything wrong with it. No, I tell him, feeling relieved. It just looks like a picture of a human brain to me. No worm. The doctor shakes his head. Your eyes, he tells me, are just sending signals down your nerves. It's your brain that decides what you see, not your eyes. And your brain only sees what the worm wants. Everyone else can see the thin white strand like a single long piece of spaghetti crawling over and over itself inside of your skull. Everyone else but me. He's lying. He must be lying. I am not sick, I tell him, and he nods in agreement. No, he says, I'm not. The worm doesn't want me sick. It needs my body to survive. It won't do anything to jeopardize its host. It is the perfect parasite. It will keep you alive, walking around, pretending to be normal, for as long as it possibly can. It will try to keep the truth from you, to stop you from trying to destroy it. And in theory, your body can live a long, healthy life. And no one, not your friends or your family or your lovers, need ever know the difference. but the worm can't be removed. Once it settles into position in your brain, only it and its offspring will ever live inside your head ever again. You will die. Whatever part animates you, your will, your soul, your spirit, the worm kills it. Once the parasite takes over, the person that you were will quietly slip away one night, and the next morning the worm will open your eyes, and everything will be normal again. It will be painless, and you won't even notice yourself dying. I don't know what to say to that. What can I say? And finally, with a dry throat and a scratchy voice, I asked the doctor how long it will be. How long do I have to do something before the worm kills me? And the doctor looks at me. There is pity in his eyes, and sympathy, but also revulsion. Disgust. As though he weren't looking at a patient. As though he were looking at a horrible alien creature behind my eyes. I'm afraid you don't understand. Okay, this one's mostly for the ladies. Even though we're going into the winter season, we need to make sure we get on that diet soon because soon it will be spring and then it'll be summer just a few months after that. I stumbled on this while I was doing work for my biology course and partly doing research online, and even though it was pretty rough, it worked like magic for me. So, here's a bit of some backstory. I was chubby from the time that I was in elementary school. Not like massively obese, but I was definitely more than 5 or 10 pounds overweight. Other than that, I wasn't ugly or anything, and I could clean up pretty well when I wanted to. But that, with the added weight, it was really hard to get a date. And that didn't jive so well with me. I liked partying, I liked going out and having fun, and being around people, and my body was really just holding me back. And you have to believe me when I say that I tried everything. No carb diets, all fruit diets, veganism, I even tried some really needlessly dangerous things like chew and spit. I can never bring myself to throw up, or just flat out starving myself. None of it ever worked anyway. So fast forward and I'm in college and we're doing a brief unit on parasitism. I know exactly what you're all thinking, and yeah, I'll admit it. The second that I discovered that you could use parasites, like tapeworms and stuff, as a weight loss aid, I went and I started digging. The thing is, it turns out that it's not really as dangerous as they make it out to be. I read so many forums, and it seems like there were only two kinds of complications that people ended up with. Either they overcompensated for what was being taken out and ended up gaining weight in the end, or they left it in for too long and it made an exit on its own that ended up being a trip to the hospital. It took a lot of studying and a lot of really careful planning, but eventually I sort of figured out how I could toe the middle of the line and not screw it up that badly. The trick seemed to be to starve the little sucker out. Maximum weight loss, since you would be burning fat, hopefully none of the complications. And I know how bad this really sounds, I really do, but just bear with me. It turns out that you can't really just buy parasites to infect yourself with on Amazon. That was where I hit my first snag. It took me a couple weeks, and in the end, I just ended up putting an ad on Craigslist before I got any leads at all. And when I finally got a bite, I had to meet with a guy in a really skeevy motel downtown to close the deal. I took them right there. It's definitely weird to think that you're intentionally inducing a parasite like a tapeworm into your body. Weird and kind of gross at first, but you work past it eventually. It helped that the guy that I bought them from was actually really appreciative and enthusiastic. Kind of a pervert, but I was sort of expecting that, coming from Craigslist. I ended up having to go back to him 2 more times over as many months. It turned out that sometimes your body is able to fight off the infestation like that. And after the 3rd time, it finally took. I know because I had been obsessively taking tests I was admittedly stealing from the biolab. But then again, we'd already finished our unit on parasites, so no one ever knew that they were even gone. So where does the magic weight loss come in? It doesn't right away. It takes time for your new little friend to latch on in there enough to start siphoning nutrients. You will get nauseous. There's no avoiding it. At first, mine was bad enough that I started keeping a trash can by my bed so that way in the morning I could just roll out and empty my stomach right there. It passes though, after a few weeks. You want to start taking vitamins right away. I admit that I also cut back down on my calories during this time, probably more than I should have, because I was paranoid about overdoing it, and I figured as long as I was popping multivitamins, I wouldn't get malnourished so bad that I ended up being super sick. And hey, it totally worked. I admit that there was a point where I experienced a little bit of hair thinning because I was apparently not taking enough vitamins. This was after about 2 months. I started adding more protein to my diet to offset it a little. I don't know if it helped or not, but I never developed a huge bald spot, so it must be okay. Here's the thing about doing it this way. The results do take some time. I promise you it pays off though. It will vary a little, lady to lady, based on a whole huge bunch of things. But if you do it right, at some point the weight will literally just melt off of you. For me, it was about 5-6 months. It was a little scary and painful when I realized that the parasite had finally died and was on its way out. I skipped class to hole up in the bathroom while I passed it. And once the solids were out, the rest of the built-up retaining water was gone within another week. And when it was all said and done, I had dropped about 20 pounds, and after another month or two of good diet and lots more vitamins, I was feeling well enough to start attending class regularly again. I don't think that you want to risk staying infected as long as I did, is the thing. After that point, the fetus is so developed that it starts to show. And it's a lot bigger, so it's harder to get rid of when you finally miscarry. The first email was sent around midnight. I was cramming for a test when I heard the notification go off. I have a very specific tone for academic things, and it surprised me to hear it that late. And I checked it out, and I felt that tingly, lower belly excitement. The kind that only comes from seeing someone fuck up catastrophically. It was, very clearly, not an email that was meant to be sent from that account. It was only one sentence, and it wasn't signed. It had been sent to the entire student body and staff, and it was coming from the administrative office. All it said was, "Is anyone else seeing flashing lights when they try to sleep?" I read the email a couple of times before I Googled the message. I wondered if maybe it was referring to something, a movie or a TV show. But I didn't come up with anything that I thought was related. Mostly just alien abduction accounts or WebMD horror stories about detached retinas. I closed the browser, finished studying, and went to bed. I watched the back of my eyeballs for a bit. No flashes. And I passed out. The next morning, the chaos that I'd anticipated was very much a reality. We are a small rural college, and not a lot of excitement happens here. So any event tends to throw us all overboard. Some of the more dramatic girls were terrified, and I heard a lot of whispered conversations about terrorists. It took a lot of self-restraint to avoid politely informing them of how asinine the idea was. Most people just want to know who done it, and there was a lot of guesses. Obviously, it had to be someone who either had the password to the account or knew how to hack it, and in both cases it pointed to one of the office interns. There were only a handful of those, and one in particular was known to be very good with computers, so most people leaned towards him. The teachers, also having received the email, assured us that the school was looking into it, and that the prank was taken very seriously when they involved such a huge breach of confidentiality. Later that evening, after a day of rumors and speculation, an official email from the administration was released. It claimed that the breach had been located and patched up by the IT team. There was no mention of a culprit. With the mystery diffused, if not exactly solved, the excitement faded, and by the next day, we'd mostly forgotten about it. Until the second email came out. We were in the middle of class, and those of us with our phones on received the notification. I pulled mine out of my pocket, ignoring the teacher's monologue about the importance of paying attention to see what I had gotten. The email was, again, only one sentence, and sent from the same admin address. It really hurts to sleep. Are any of you noticing it too? Murmurs rippled through the class, and the teacher, sensing that something had happened, checked his email. He read the message, shut his laptop, and called the front office. He spoke quietly and listened for a moment before hanging up. All right, this is all very strange and interesting, but let's get back to the subject here. No one was focused, but we made it through class with no further interruption. In my room that night, I looked at the two messages side by side. Is anyone else seeing flashing lights when they try to sleep? It really hurts to sleep. Are any of you noticing it too? I took a sip of my drink and thought about it. I found it strange that someone would go through so much trouble to send emails to the student body. Surely they would have just hacked the account, taken the addresses, and sent the emails with a throwaway account. But for whatever reason, they chose to use the official admin account. For the first breach, they might have been suspended, maybe had a scholarship taken away. It could have been an accident, but for this, an intentional use of the account, this would almost certainly mean that they would be kicked out. Hell, they might even face jail time. What could possibly be so worth the risk? What could they do on the admin account that they couldn't do any other way? I sat and I stared at the messages, thought for a while. What was so important that was worth potential jail time? What would I consider that critical, that necessary to spread as widely as possible? And suddenly inspired, I googled flashing lights behind the eyes as a symptom. Migraine headaches, detached retinas, stroke, eye disease, and certain infections. And a thought began to form, a distant memory of something that I read a long time ago. Putting it aside, I moved on to the second email. It hurts to sleep. That was a bit harder to figure out. Did they mean it physically hurt to sleep? I looked up restless leg syndrome, which was described as an incessant tingling or the constant driving need to move the legs. Was that what that meant? Or did it mean that it hurt to sleep because the things that they dreamed of were painful? I wondered if the things described were meant to be taken literally or if it was an illusion, a poem of sorts. It seemed unlikely, given that the first message seemed consistent with a physical ailment. And I was troubled, and I dug a little deeper. Certain infections of the sinuses, of the lining of the brain, could cause pain even while in REM sleep. I sat back and I looked at the emails again, not wanting to jump to conclusions. I tried to keep things in perspective, but my heart was beating a little faster. I decided that the best thing to do was wait. I studied for a test that day and went to bed, and I slept fine. In the afternoon, the administration called for a mandatory all-school assembly. They addressed the emails and urged whoever was doing it to come forward. If they did so, they would avoid expulsion. But no one did, so the rest of the assembly was spent discussing internet safety, expected student behaviors, and things like that. All of us studied each other, looking for anyone who stuck out, who was too uncomfortable or appeared even vaguely guilty. After the assembly, a few people claimed unofficial responsibility, but these claims were debunked quickly. So the speculation continued, and a lot of theories were thrown around. Some were similar to mine, and others were wildly different. The consensus, however, was that whoever was doing it wanted something. What was it? Help? Advice? An answer? What? We couldn't respond to them. So what exactly did they hope to gain from the emails? As the emails continued, the memory that I'd had on the back burner came forward, and more, I felt sure that I knew what the anonymous writer was asking for. I didn't share my views, but I began to prepare. The emails were sent at staggered times, each from the admin account. As time passed, they became less and less coherent. Do your eyes feel tighter? If you start to have trouble remembering colors, get help. Sinus burning is part of it, I think. Pay attention. Wear masks. Despite being what most people believed, and were assured was, a prank, the school became enveloped in a kind of hysteria. The culprit was using proxies and other means to avoid detection. Although the admin email was supposedly protected, they gained access easily. Many students began to suspect that they were attempting to report a cover-up of some sort. Was there something going on that the administration didn't want us to know? What information was this person, who people started calling Proxy, as he was mistakenly referred to as an admin response email, trying so hard to pass along to us? And what did he mean by masks? Many students began wearing medical masks, convinced that some kind of super flu was going around behind the scenes. The campus hospital released their current number of patients, assuring the student body that nothing was wrong, but the emails kept coming, and the hysteria grew. I stayed to the side and I watched. The masks were the best thing Proxy could have offered us. Can you still sleep? God, the lights are so damn bright. Cover all lights, no matter how small. People bought blackout curtains, took sleeping pills, and avoided anyone who appeared to be tired. Somehow, the disease morphed into a kind of fatal, infectious insomnia, and some people started sleeping through classes. Desperate to sleep more than enough to avoid the illness, they stocked up on pills and alcohol and pot, anything to make them tired. The administration attempted damage control, but the emails kept coming. I continued to do my research, solidifying my theory. In place of my finals, I spent hours combing the internet, looking for symptoms, matching them, and piecing them together into a final awful picture. I made a trip into town to see a doctor that I knew well, and convinced him to write me a script for a medication. Meanwhile, the emails continued into a steady stream. I can't close my eyes. Can you close your eyes? NyQuil hurts so much that it hurts so much, don't take it. What's the sky again? I cannot remember. If the button starts to push, you have to listen. It hurts. Aspirin has to be crushed to help. It's coming. Masks didn't help. I'm sorry. Up. And then the email stopped. The campus held its breath, waiting. The silence was deafening. And we waited. They found his body on the roof of the gym 3 days later. We saw the ambulance and the fire trucks pull up, and a huge crowd of us came to watch. No one told us that someone had died, but we knew. We also knew that it was him, the student that we called Proxy. No one spoke while his body was lowered off the roof in a bag, and it was rolled into the ambulance bay. Someone behind me quietly pointed at the strange shape of the bag. The details came after. Proxy's real name was Oliver. He was a quiet sophomore who almost no one knew, and after his death, his personal computer was taken away to be analyzed, and we heard nothing more about it. The email stopped, and although things calmed down, many students still wore masks. They still tried to decode the messages Oliver left behind. Groups met up in the evenings in various dorms to talk about what they had meant. He became a kind of cultural icon among these groups, a strange, unknown student who had inspired the entire school to fly into hysteria, and had left at the peak of his fame. The only thing that they knew about him, they gleaned from what little was available on the internet. He was working towards an environmental studies major. He loved computers, was evidently very proficient with them. He had a cat named Mo. No one knew what happened to Mo. His life was picked apart and studied and turned over for any clues as to what had happened to him. I sat in on these groups and listened, never trying to steer anyone towards the right direction. They'd know soon enough. And around 2 weeks after Oliver's death, people started getting sick. It started slowly at first. The emails were largely forgotten by this point, save for a few select die-hard fans that clung to them. Here and there, students would get sick, drop out, and go home to recover. It was close to the end of the year, and we were all cramming for finals, so we hardly noticed that they didn't come back. Most people met up in the library in large groups to help each other study. I kept to myself, in the silence of my room, and I listened to my neighbors. In class, I sat in the back and became a ghost, picking up on any conversation that I could hear. People started to complain of headaches, stiff necks, strange, floating specks in their vision, like little sparks. The campus hospital started seeing an influx of these ailments and issued a mandatory vaccine for meningitis. We all received it, but the ailment continued to spread. The headaches, I heard, were severe. Even in sleep, they could be felt, pounding in the front of the head and behind the sinus cavities. People complained of eyes that bugged out, their eyelids barely covering them anymore, and it was hard to see. There were frequent nosebleeds in class. It was now common for students to carry boxes of tissues to staunch them. The administration addressed this new influx of illness, advising students with symptoms to rest and avoid going to class. But finals were close, and most soldiered through what was being referred to as a flu. The girl who sat in front of me sent a text to her friend, which I read over her shoulder. "Does your nose burn when it bleeds? Fuck. Feels like I've been snorting glass or something." Memory problems began to set in. Soon, people were having trouble completing sentences. They looked terrible. Their eyes were bloodshot and terribly bugged out. Their faces were pale, sometimes smeared with blood from the nosebleeds that never seemed to stop. It wasn't uncommon to see these students wandering the campus blankly, having forgotten where they were going or where their dorms were. The administration sent out jumbled emails advising students that classes for the next week would be canceled, as the majority of staff was out with the flu. Drink. Plenty of see-through liquids. Nad, be sure to stay out of contact of those who are sick. Classes will resume on May 3rd. I stopped attending classes. I took the bus into town and purchased a small stockpile of food, water, and toiletries. And then I locked myself in my room, sealed the door and the AC vent with duct tape, and began using a plastic bucket to collect my waste. When the bucket was full, I would open the window briefly and empty it outside. I sat in my room, surviving on my rations, and waiting for the final step, which I now suspected would happen very soon. Through the walls, I could hear my neighbors moaning, tossing in bed and occasionally vomiting or moving in rhythmic patterns. Sometimes they talked to themselves. Sometimes they just screamed. I laid in bed at night and I listened to them move furniture around, trying to block out the light from outside, then moving it so that way they could leave their rooms and move up to the next floor, driven by a false flight instinct. When the electricity to the campus died, I popped batteries into my flashlight and camping lantern. I kept my door sealed, and I waited. On the morning of May 5th, I woke to complete silence, knowing what had happened. I put on a surgical mask and unsealed my door. I followed the blood trails to the elevator, but I didn't take it. Instead, I took the stairs, following the smeared handprints on the walls to the roof access, which had been propped open with a textbook. I went out to the door and stepped on the roof, but there was very little space to put my feet. I had to stand on a few fingers, but I doubted that their owners would mind. On the roof, and on every roof that I could see from my position, the students and faculty had gathered together in a great mass. Some were on their knees, some sitting Indian style. Others, the weaker ones, were propped up on their friends, their heads flopped back and mouths open. The birds hadn't gotten all their eyes yet, though they were making fast work of them. They perched on the students' shoulders and ignored the strange, brownish stems that the optic nerves had become in favor of the succulent cherry-red berries on top. The student close to me, a young man whose name I couldn't recall, had not yet lost his eyes, and I studied him closely. From the swollen, bloody sockets, the stalks of his nerves jutted upward almost a foot. I could see the fibers being torn from being forced to stretch so much. But the calcification prevented them from sagging or breaking. The eyes themselves were full of coagulated blood, which made them bulge and weep. His mouth gaped open, and the blood from his nose had pooled in it. Bending down, I could see that his soft palate had collapsed, and in its place were a network of dark, slimy roots. The palate lay on his tongue, an almost bubblegum pink. I stood, looked at the collective mass of humanity, and the timer on my watch began to go off. I pulled the bottle out of my pocket and I swallowed a pill dry. I put the bottle back and I took a last look at the roof. 200 people, maybe more, their heads tilted to the sky, their eyes on stalks. If I squinted, it was almost beautiful. A field of red berries. A crow settled nearby, called and plucked out the berries from the stalk. The berry popped in a gush of fluid that covered the crow's beak and chest. And I took my leave. On the drive into town, I composed an email that I would send to the police station. I would send it to all neighboring counties, as well as the CDC. This was assuming, of course, that no one else had figured it out yet. I would make it very brief. There was no room for poetry anymore. It is an airborne fungus, a mutant strain. Mucous membranes are the first to be affected. If you are sick, it is too late. Resist the urge to go up. Do not spread your spores to other people or animals. Prepare. Stock up on anything necessary. Find a room, sealed completely. Do not leave for any reason. Fluconazole.